Back again to the First World War and what we might learn from it concerning the propagation of mysteries, myths, legends and lies. This video concerns the aerial threat to Britain and also the stories of the siege gun emplacements that never were. The First World War was the first aerial war, and whilst aircraft in no way decided the outcome of the war, it was their exploitation and development during it which dictated the way future wars would be fought. And of course it was in that war that aircraft were first used in mass raids on civilian populations by both sides. The situation at the outbreak of war was that the British government and armed forces had not embraced aircraft in the decade since the Wright brothers' first hop, skip and jump. They relied then, as they had done for so long, on the invincibility of the Royal Navy. Winston Churchill, who was First Lord of the Admiralty at the outbreak of war, records that he promised no large-scale invasion of Britain was possible because of our dominance of the seas. Consideration was given to the possibility of invasion both before and during the war, and it was thought that due to our naval superiority, no German force larger than 10 to 20,000 could be landed, and that the outcome of any attempted invasion would therefore be an expensive one for Germany. Rather than its aircraft, Britain had instead invested in its navy, with the result that at the outbreak of war it could send just 100 planes across the sea with the British Expeditionary Force and retain just 50 planes for the defence of the islands at home. To give some perspective on the progress in aviation that the war brought, by the end of the conflict Britain alone had manufactured another 58,000 aircraft. The perils of First World War air combat in craft made out of bicycle parts and toilet paper is also highlighted by the fact that 36,000 of these 58,000 aircraft were lost, shot down, crashed or damaged. More sobering is the fact that 14,166 British pilots were killed during the war, and 8,000 of those were actually killed in training, having never seen combat. In the early days, planes were pretty much just sent up for a quick look around. The tactical benefits of aerial reconnaissance were yet to be fully understood, or even perhaps accepted by an old-school army who still considered the cavalry to be their reconnaissance wing. But as a generation of European nobility were literally decimated within weeks, the result of cavalry charges against machine gun and artillery positions, the value of air reconnaissance began to sink in. Early aerial warfare was a gentlemanly affair, with enemy pilots waving to each other as their paths crossed in the air. But the reality soon dawned that they should perhaps be trying to shoot each other down rather than waving blithely. South African pilot Kenneth van der Spuy wrote, "I spotted a strange aircraft, so I sidled up to him and saw he was a Hun. I got my revolver and we had a revolver battle up there. We were very close to each other and I could see him quite well. I finished my 6 shots and he finished his. We both waved each other goodbye and set off." Within a few weeks, pistols, rifles and shotguns had given way to machine guns, and air warfare proper had begun. Whilst the invasion of Britain appeared a very remote possibility, there was one threat that was only too real: the Zeppelins. These leviathans of the air could reach Britain, and there was no defence against them. It would be 2 years before a British plane would shoot down a Zeppelin. Terror from the skies was science fiction stuff, and the Zeppelins still hold a fascination for many. In reality, the German fixed-wing bombing raids on Britain were as effective as the Zeppelin raids, and it is surely no coincidence that King George V issued his royal proclamation changing the name of his royal house from the very German-sounding Saxe, Coburg and Gotha to the very English-sounding Windsor on the 17th of July 1917, just 1 month after the first daylight raid on London by German fixed-wing bombers. The bombers used were Gothas, and a bomb dropped on a primary school in London that day killed 16 children. But it is the Zeppelins we remember. In December 1914, a national newspaper, the Daily Express, published a mock-up of a Zeppelin over the Houses of Parliament. Around the same time, the same paper published a quote from a Miss Kirby, just returned from Germany, saying she had overheard highly placed officials talking of a raid on England with 100 airships capable of firing projectiles from the sides, top and bottom. Who was Miss Kirby? How did she have access to highly placed officials? And how the Germans were going to engineer a raid of 100 airships when only about a dozen existed in the world? These were just some of the questions that the editors of the Express did not think required pursuing before they published this scare story. Skepticism is not required when the story fits what you want to believe or want others to believe, and when you put that desire above everything else. Rumours abounded that spies were guiding the Zeppelins to their targets in England using car headlights, something that was even raised in the House of Commons. Not a single case was ever prosecuted. And apparently there were rumours of a secret Zeppelin base in the Lake District, a rumour I've not been able to track back to source, but it is widely reported that a British aviation pioneer, Bentfield Hucks, flew over the area to search for, or perhaps scotch, rumours of said base. The government did little to quell the public's fears, perhaps in part because they saw it as an opportunity to pull men into the recruitment offices. 85,000 men had formed the British Expeditionary Force. Pre-war estimates was that the BEF would suffer a 40% casualty rate in the first 6 months of war. In reality, the casualty rate was nearly 100% in the first 3 months. In holding and then turning the German offensive, the sacrifice of the first 7 divisions was almost complete. By the end of the war, 9 million British men would have taken part in the war, and so the rumours did serve a positive purpose in part for the government, just as later stories of German atrocities would. The Silvertown munitions factory explosion in West Ham, very near the present-day Thames flood barrier, in which 50 tons of TNT detonated with the loss of 73 lives, was rumoured to have been the result of Zeppelin activity. It wasn't. This, amongst many rumours, fuelled by the foreign-sounding company Brunner Mond, which operated the factory. The eponymous Ludwig Mond of the partnership was a German, though he had died 7 years earlier, and his son and successor, Alfred, a British baronet and born in Lancashire, was very much an English gentleman. A quarry near Luton, north of London, and on a main arterial route into the capital, was also the subject of intrigue. This quarry, deep into a chalk hillside, had people with German-sounding names associated with it, and so of course it was now being used for, well, something. Was it holding German weapons or supplies? Was it perhaps a secret Zeppelin base? The papers demanded an answer, or were they simply whipping the public up into a frenzy of fear and distrust? James Haywood, in his 2002 book Myths and Legends of the First World War, details an account retrieved from a 1960s edition of the Hackney and Kingsland Gazette. This is a very improbable story concerning the landing of a saboteur on Hackney marshes in October 1916. According to Mr. S.C. Thomas, while in the company of a young lady named Hilda Kavanagh on the marshes near the River Lee on the evening of the 19th of October 1916, hearing a swishing droning sound, we looked up and saw a Zeppelin right over our heads at the height of 100 feet. Orders were barked out, a clanking sound, and from about 40 feet from the rear a light showed. A basket was lowered, hit the ground, 10 feet from us, toppled over, and a tall man got out. He looked all around, saw us, and came to us, and asked the way to Silvertown in perfect English. I told him to follow the Lee towing path till he came to Bow. He had either one eye or a patch, and carried a long parcel wrapped in black canvas. The basket was wound up, and the Zepp pointed its nose upwards and went away at a very fast speed. Meanwhile, searchlights madly fanned the sky, searching for it. I went to Hackney Police and told them but was laughed at. If any other persons were on the marshes then, perhaps they will verify my account of a German landing in London. Did a Zeppelin land a spy on Hackney marshes? The answer is an almost definite no. The Zeppelins were designed to fly at over 10,000 feet, later 20,000 feet, both to avoid detection and to be above the ceiling of Allied aircraft. Add to this that all Zeppelin raids are well documented. There was a raid on the 1st of October 1916 in which one Zeppelin reached London. It was piloted by Heinrich Mathy, a veteran of 15 raids, and under no illusion as to his eventual fate. A week before the raid, his diary entry reads, "It is only a question of time before we join the rest. Everyone admits that they feel it. If anyone should say that he was not haunted by visions of burning airships, then he would be a braggart." For the Zeppelin crew, engulfed in flame at 10,000 feet, there were two choices: burn to death or jump to their death. Matthew's Zeppelin was shot down and crashed in Potter's Bar. His body and those of his crew were lifted out of the ground, leaving clear indentations where they fell. And so the idea that a Zeppelin hovered to release a spy is absurd. But someone was convinced enough in their own mind to write a letter stating their claim. Heightened anxiety can have strange effects on people. Perhaps whipping the public into a frenzy is justified to increase the state of alertness. But us humans are expert at pattern matching and seeing what is not there. It is only the natural suppression of our adrenaline which stops us from continually running for shelter or perhaps for a weapon. Again, perhaps this is justified in war. But if we find someone using the same tactics when there is no real and present danger, then we should recognise that we are being manipulated. The Zeppelin raids did have a big psychological effect on the British public. Total blackouts were introduced to prevent the Zeppelins from finding their targets. 300,000 Londoners would spend their nights using the London Underground as mass air raid shelters. And for a time, Britain was defenceless against the attacks. This sapped morale. The hard facts are that there were just 52 Zeppelin raids on Britain, causing minimal damage and killing 500 people. Any death is a tragedy, but compare 500 to the overall casualty list of the war, and you have some perspective. Numbers are always difficult to embrace, but here is a little statistic for you. England has over 10,000 parishes. In many instances you can think of a parish as a village or town. In 1936, Arthur Mee used the phrase "thankful village" to describe those parishes in which all soldiers returned from the First World War. According to a 2013 updated study, of the over 10,000 English parishes, just 51 had something to be thankful for, together with just 2 parishes in Wales, and there were no thankful parishes in either Scotland or the whole of Ireland. So the Zeppelin reality was different to the perception, but the Zeppelins were new, huge and scary, and seen as a real threat to an island people unaffected by warfare on their own soil for generations. Siege guns were another fertile area of conspiracy theories. This has been a frustrating one to research. It was obviously common knowledge even in 1914 that Germany and its agents were preparing sites everywhere to take huge siege guns, which could be placed to dominate a wide area. But where the rumour got started, I'm not certain. These siege guns were new. They neutralised any fortifications and were used to great effect by Germany against Belgian fortresses in 1914. Germany had developed huge siege guns that required a solid platform, and this fed into the rumour mill. It is likely that reports mistakenly identified the Big Bertha mobile siege guns used against the Belgian forts with this earlier design, and the conspiratorial mind put 2 and 2 together. Again, new terms and new technology might have played a part here. Any airship is a Zeppelin. Any big gun is Big Bertha. When Paris was attacked in March 1918, it was initially thought they had been raided by Zeppelins or fixed-wing craft. When artillery shell case fragments were found, it was assumed that the fire must have come from within France or even Paris itself, the German front line being almost 3 times the range of any known gunaway. and so quarries and the like were searched for the weapon. It was soon found by aerial reconnaissance. It was behind German lines, 75 miles away. The Paris gun, as it is now known, was something special. It is even parodied in the opening scenes of Chaplin's Great Dictator, where, aiming for Notre Dame, the shell manages only to destroy an outhouse. Even in that film, the gun is called Big Bertha. Back in Britain and anywhere there was a hard-top tennis court or a building that someone arbitrarily decided had overly well-constructed concrete foundations, especially if the owner was of a foreign nationality, became a possible site for a German siege gun. And so the police were called in to investigate country houses, offices and factories, not only in England but also Scotland. The implication was, of course, that the Germans had been planning for the war well in advance, setting up secret arms caches, Zeppelin bases and concrete platforms for their siege guns all around Britain, ready to trample over us in an instant. And of course this fed the spy frenzy. No German, however long they had been resident, and even if they had been naturalised, could be trusted. And as you Americans smile at the gullibility of us old Brits, you should remind yourselves that the rumours which started here quickly percolated to the USA. In 1916, the New York Times published an article titled "See Big Gun Sites at 30 Points Here." The reference is to foreign-owned premises on Staten Island being investigated for siege gun platforms. The article did go on to explain that the allegations were found to be without warrant, and also went to pains not to use the word German in their article, but made it very clear to their readers that this involved premises owned by foreigners who were not from Allied countries. Once again, this article is all about the title and the effect that would have had on the psyche. We all know that rumours, even spread in the form of a denial, are hard to suppress. And the rumour even spread to the northern state of Ottawa. Sorry, Canadians. Well, I hope that I educated and entertained you a little here. I personally am finding my research into the First World War utterly fascinating, especially as I try to enter the minds of my great-grandfather's generation. And I hope these videos will prompt you to learn a little more about these somewhat eclipsed events of the First World War. I still haven't got round to the 500,000 ghostly Russians clogging up the British railway network. Perhaps I'll do that next time, along with the Angel of Mons. And thank you all, as always, for watching.